We all know the visual, right? The classic historic peace treaty.
Oh, yeah. Two leaders in sharp suits.
Exactly. Sitting in some neutral capital, signing a document while, cameras flash everywhere.
Right, the ultimate finish line.
Yeah, for a long time that was considered the finish line for conflict resolution. But, and this is wild, if you actually look at the data on those high-level agreements, the failure rate is just staggering.
It really is.
The ink dries, the politicians fly home, and within months or sometimes even weeks, the conflict on the ground just flares right back up.
Yeah, because the historical approach has, it's almost always been top-down.
Right.
The assumption was basically that if you can get the people with the highest authority, the politicians, the military generals, to agree on a power-sharing framework, well, stability will just naturally trickle down to the rest of the population.
It's like magic.
Right.
Yeah.
But the empirical evidence we have today paints a drastically different picture.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is so critical. We are looking at this massive seismic shift in how peace is actually built in conflict zones.
And we're focusing specifically on Sulu in the Philippines.
Yes, Sulu, because the strategy there is moving aggressively away from that elite diplomacy and moving toward community-led grassroots reconciliation.
Which is a huge pivot.
It is. And for you listening right now, whether you're trying to understand global geopolitics, or honestly, even if you're just navigating intense workplace politics or like a neighborhood dispute, the mechanics of how human beings actually resolve deep-seated conflict, it's going to change how you look at everyday friction.
Absolutely. Because the shift we are discussing today, it fundamentally redefines who holds the actual power to create lasting stability.
Yeah.
It moves the center of gravity entirely from the state capital all the way down to the rural village.
And we have an unbelievable stack of data to guide us today, right?
Oh, massive.
I mean, our sources conducted this rigorous synthesis that started by scanning over 170 million indexed research papers.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around.
Right. 170 million. They utilized 6 unique search groups to cast this massive net and then painstakingly narrowed it all down to 50 highly relevant empirical studies.
And these are focused specifically on community-centered peace building.
Yeah. So going from millions of data points to just 50 empirical studies.
It means we are not looking at, isolated anecdotes here.
Right.
We are looking at the absolute strongest, most validated signals in the academic literature about how communities actually recover from violence.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We're going to figure out if everyday people, local communities, are actually better at brokering lasting peace than elite politicians.
And we want to understand the exact mechanisms of how they do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really grasp why grassroots mediation is taking over in places like Sulu, we kind of have to establish why the traditional model is breaking down.
Right, and the literature we reviewed is quite explicit about this. The mechanical failures of top-down peace processes are, they're very well documented.
I was trying to find a good way to visualize this failure rate from the data, and it struck me. Elite-level diplomacy is basically like trying to cure a systemic bacterial infection with, skin lotion.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Because the treaty clears up the surface rash, which is the act of shooting. The politicians see the clear skin, they take a photo, they declare victory.
But the actual infection is still there.
Exactly. The socioeconomic vulnerabilities, the deep-seated grievances, those are the bacteria multiplying in the bloodstream. If you don't use the antibiotics of local grassroots reconciliation, the rash just comes right back.
What's fascinating here is how the data maps perfectly onto that systemic view. The literature critiques top-down processes precisely because they only treat those surface symptoms.
Right.
When elite leaders sign a treaty, they are generally negotiating, political power sharing.
It's like dividing up parliamentary seats.
Exactly, or arranging military stand-downs. But they're completely bypassing the internal infection.
The stuff that actually matters to people.
Yes. Things like historical land dispossession, generational clan feuds, and severe political exclusion at the local level.
Because a signature in Manila doesn't mean anything to a farmer in Sulu who, lost their ancestral land 3 generations ago.
No, it doesn't.
The treaty doesn't give them their land back. It doesn't put food on their table.
The disconnect is fundamental, and because of that disconnect, these elite-driven processes completely lack local legitimacy.
Which is key.
The research consistently finds that without local buy-in, treaties simply do not hold. The people on the ground do not recognize the authority of those signatories to resolve their highly localized disputes.
Right, because the disputes are deeply personal.
Exactly. Bottom-up approaches succeed because they are culturally sensitive and they target those structural foundations, the socioeconomic realities that drive people to pick up a weapon in the first place.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the sources don't just, conclude that local is better. They actually break down the exact toolkit these communities are using to act as that systemic antibiotic.
Yeah, the actual mechanics of it.
And I have to admit, when I first read through the pillars of this toolkit, I was a little
Oh,
confused.
really? How so?
Well, let's take the Balik Barangay initiative, for example. Barangay means village or neighborhood, right?
Right.
So looking at the data, it initially just read to me like a standard neighborhood jobs program, like
Okay.
giving out agricultural tools or skills training. I just didn't understand how that actually stops bullets.
Ah, I see.
Walk me through the psychological or economic mechanism there. Like, how does farming equipment lead to peace?
So the mechanism is actually rooted in the economics of conflict. In a lot of these regions, participating in an armed group isn't necessarily just an ideological choice.
Yeah, okay.
It is often an economic necessity. When a region has been destabilized for decades, the legitimate economy completely collapses.
Makes sense.
So the illicit economy, which is often managed by militant groups, becomes the only reliable way to feed your family.
Ah, wow. So the militia is essentially the biggest employer in town.
Precisely.
Mhm.
That's exactly the dynamic the studies highlight. What the Balik Barangay Initiative does is disrupt that illicit economy by actively restoring legitimate livelihoods at the micro level.
Okay, so it's a direct competitor.
Yes, when you provide targeted economic assistance and skills training right there in the community, you give individuals a viable alternative to picking up a rifle.
That is so practical.
It is. You are addressing public safety and education access simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's a highly pragmatic approach to peace, replacing the economy of war with an economy of community development.
Because if people have crops to tend to and a market to sell them in, the militant recruiters just lose their leverage.
Exactly. They have a better offer now.
That makes so much more sense. It isn't just like charity, it's a strategic dismantling of the conflict supply chain.
Right.
But, okay, there's another major pillar the studies emphasized heavily, and this is the one where I really need to push back a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's the role of Islamic teachings. The data shows local Muslim educators using concepts of Sharia and justice as active tools for peace building, alongside interfaith dialogue.
Yes, heavily featured in the literature.
Now, wait, aren't religious differences usually cited as the cause of these regional conflicts? How are they suddenly being used as the cure?
It totally seems counterintuitive from, like, a Western secular perspective. But the theoretical framework from our sources explains why this is arguably the most powerful tool they have.
Okay.
The literature introduces a concept called emancipatory elicitive religious peace building, or EERPB for short.
Emancipatory elicitive religious peace building. Wow, that is quite the academic mouthful.
I know the terminology is dense, but the concept itself is really profound.
Okay, break it down for me.
So traditional international peace building often tries to impose rigid secular standards, right? International mediators fly into a deeply religious region and essentially say, leave your theology at the door. We're going to build a secular administrative resolution.
Like a standard legal contract.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in places like Sulu, faith isn't just, a private weekend activity. It is the fundamental lens through which all of life, justice, law, and ethics are understood.
So asking them to ignore their religion to negotiate a ceasefire, it's basically asking them to negotiate in a foreign psychological language.
That's a great way to put it. And the EERPB framework takes it a step further. It isn't just about translating terms, it is about cognitive framing.
What do you mean?
What it does is use spirituality and ethical reasoning to adapt to the local context. Instead of treating religion as an obstacle to overcome, local educators tap into the profound teachings of justice, mercy, and community inherent in Islam.
To bridge those communal rifts.
Right.
Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like mechanically? Because it sounds great in theory, but how does an educator use theology to actually stop a fight over resources?
Sure, think about a localized blood feud, what is often called Rito in the region.
Okay, a blood feud.
If a secular diplomat approaches two warring families, they might offer a financial settlement or draw a territorial border.
Right, a very sterile solution.
But the families might completely reject it because their honor and their sense of divine justice haven't been satisfied.
Ah, I see.
A local imam, however, using the EERPB framework, will mediate the dispute using specific concepts of Sharia that emphasize restorative justice and forgiveness over retaliation.
Wow.
They reframe peace not as a government mandate, but as a religious imperative.
Yeah.
When the resolution is rooted in their own sacred traditions, the community feels deeply obligated to uphold it.
That completely flips the script.
It does.
You aren't importing a foreign solution. You are eliciting the solution from the culture's own deeply held values. You're using the community's ethical framework to say, our faith demands that we resolve this without further bloodshed.
It transforms religion from a wedge into a bridge.
That's incredibly powerful.
But, and this is a big but, an interfaith dialogue strategy is completely useless if the person facilitating it isn't trusted.
Right, the messenger matters.
Exactly. If you hand this EERPB framework to a corrupt government official, it still fails. The mechanism only works because of the specific people wielding it.
Which shifts our focus to the actual builders, right? Who is administering these antibiotics on the ground.
Yes, the mediators themselves.
The data highlights an incredibly diverse coalition of local mediators. And again, we aren't talking about diplomats with law degrees from foreign universities.
No, not at all.
We are talking about local religious leaders, educators, and civil society organizations. But honestly, the inclusion of youth leaders really stood out to me.
The emphasis on youth engagement is so critical for long-term durability, because armed conflicts are inherently generational. Yeah.
Right, the grievances are just passed down from parent to child.
Exactly. The studies note that when young people are actively empowered as mediators, it physically disrupts that generational cycle of violence.
Because they're part of the solution now.
Yes. They are given a direct stake in the stability of their village, which makes them far less susceptible to radicalization by militant groups.
And then there are the civil society organizations, or CSOs. They kind of act as the connective tissue, right?
They do.
They have the administrative capacity to link these localized village-level mediators with the broader regional policy processes.
Yes, providing that crucial infrastructure.
But I have to say, the absolute most surprising mediator mentioned in the 50 studies, military personnel.
Ah, yes. The inclusion of security forces is a really nuanced point in the data.
Yeah, explain that, because I was shocked.
Well, we are talking about military personnel who have consciously shifted their operational approach.
Okay.
Instead of traditional enforcement, conducting raids, manning aggressive checkpoints, or occupying a village, they shift entirely to facilitation.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It looks like providing logistical support rather than kinetic force. Instead of kicking down doors, a military unit might provide the secure transport needed for rival clan leaders to meet safely in a neutral location.
Wow.
Or they might offer supply chain support for the Balak Barangay agricultural initiatives we talked about earlier.
So they're literally delivering the farming tools.
Exactly. They work collaboratively with the local dialogue circles, providing the protective umbrella under which the grassroots mediators can do the actual interpersonal work.
If you look at that combined coalition, educators leveraging local faith, youth breaking generational cycles, and a military that facilitates rather than enforces.
It's powerful.
It is a completely different architecture for peace than anything you see on the international news.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the data reveals that this specific architecture isn't just an isolated phenomenon in Sulu.
Really? Where else is it happening?
The sources actually draw on comparative studies across several regions in Southeast Asia. We see the exact same functional patterns in Mindanao, in the Philippines, in Asa, in Indonesia, and in southern Thailand.
Oh, wow. So this isn't an anomaly. It's a validated regional playbook.
The empirical evidence is remarkably consistent. Across all these distinct multicultural settings, participatory action research, leveraging traditional authority structures, and empowering youth are the definitive best practices for reconciliation.
That consistency really highlights how universal the mechanics of human conflict actually are.
Absolutely.
And I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own life for a second. Think about your workplace, your neighborhood, or even your extended family.
We all have those conflicts.
Right. When a serious tension boils over, who are the informal, everyday mediators that actually step in and resolve it?
It's rarely the people in charge.
Exactly. When HR fails to address a toxic team dynamic, or when management issues some top-down policy that makes everyone angry, who is the person who actually sits down, listens, and bridges the gap?
Yeah.
It is almost never the person with the fanciest title or the highest salary. It's the person with the most local trust.
Because the mechanics of trust operate the exact same way, whether you are navigating a corporate office restructuring or a territorial dispute in Southeast Asia.
But okay, I have to admit, reading through all this, it starts to sound dangerously close to a utopia.
I know what you mean.
You have grassroots communities holding hands, youth leaders and imams coming together, the military dropping their weapons to help carry supplies. It sounds incredibly optimistic.
It does sound a bit perfect.
Thankfully, the 50 empirical studies we're drawing from do not shy away from the harsh reality checks.
No, they don't. The researchers are acutely aware of that danger. They explicitly warn against romanticizing the local.
Right.
Grassroots communities are not inherently peaceful, harmonious entities. They are human, and that means they are fraught with internal divisions, historical prejudices, and severe power imbalances.
And the sources highlight several critical mechanical threats to this bottom-up approach. The most prominent one is elite capture.
Yes, elite capture.
I found this concept fascinating because just because a process is labeled local doesn't mean it's democratic or fair.
Elite capture is a pervasive threat. It occurs when local elites, say, a wealthy landowner, a corrupt mayor, or a prominent clan leader, co-opt the grassroots initiatives for their own benefit.
So, like, if an international NGO sends a $50,000 grant to a village for a Belik Barangay agricultural program,
Right.
the local warlord might just intercept the funds, distribute the tools only to their loyalists, and use the peace-building initiative to actually consolidate their own power against rival families.
That is exactly the scenario the literature warns about.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the entire peace process loses its legitimacy instantly.
It just becomes another weapon.
Exactly. Furthermore, even when local leaders operate with perfect integrity, these community-led programs are severely hindered by simple resource limitations.
Right, they just run out of money.
A grassroots youth program might have incredible local trust and a brilliant strategy. But if they run out of funding after 6 months because they lack administrative backing, their impact evaporates.
And then you have coordination lapses. You might have 10 brilliant, localized initiative happening in 10 neighboring villages. But if they aren't communicating with each other, they can't scale to stabilize the whole province.
Which is why this raises an important question. How do we actually scale these community efforts?
Yeah, because it's a huge paradox.
It is. If these initiatives stay small and purely local, they run out of money or get crushed by local corruption.
Right.
But if they get too big, bureaucratic, and institutionalized, they lose that vital, highly specific local trust we just established as the core mechanism of success.
The synthesis of the 50 studies points to a very specific structural solution for this, the hybrid model.
Yes, the hybrid
The
model.
literature argues that purely bottom-up or purely top-down approaches are both mechanically flawed.
The most effective path forward is an intentional structural blend of both. It's about leveraging the unique strengths of each layer.
It's basically the Goldilocks zone for durable peace.
Exactly.
Going back to our earlier analogy, it's like giving the patient the highly targeted systemic antibiotic, but also giving them the hospital bed and the IV fluids to support their recovery.
That's perfect. The bottom-up local agency provides the antibiotic. The local mediators must lead the dialogue, utilize the EERPB framework, and shape the cultural goals.
Because they're the only ones holding the currency of trust.
Exactly. But they cannot operate in a vacuum. They need supportive institutional frameworks, the top-down element to act as the hospital bed.
Right, the state governments or international bodies.
They must provide the structural scaffolding. They provide the consistent funding streams, the logistical resources, and most importantly, the auditing and protection mechanisms to prevent elite capture by local warlords.
So the institutions don't dictate what the piece looks like. They don't fly in and paint the roof. They just make sure the local architects and builders have the materials they need to fix the foundation, and they ensure nobody steals the materials along the way.
When formal institutions effectively integrate with grassroots actors without undermining their local autonomy, the data shows that is when you achieve the most robust, long-lasting stability.
It is a brilliant, pragmatic synergy. Okay, as we start to pull all these threads together, let's recap the journey of this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
We started by looking at the illusion of the shiny peace treaty, the top-down approach that completely fails to address the root systemic infections of conflict and lacks any real legitimacy on the ground.
Right.
Then we dove into the grassroots toolkit in Sulu. We explored the mechanics of how programs like Balik Barangay strategically dismantle the illicit war economy.
And how emancipatory elicitive religious peacebuilding uses deeply held spiritual values as a cognitive bridge.
Rather than an ideological wedge.
Exactly.
We also identified the vital, everyday mediators wielding that toolkit. The youth breaking generational cycles, the religious educators reframing justice, the civil society groups.
And we're doing this work across the broader region, including Mindanao and ACE.
And finally, we grounded all of this in reality. We acknowledged the human flaws of local communities, detailing how threats like elite capture and resource limitations necessitate a hybrid model.
Yes.
Pairing bottom-up legitimacy with top-down institutional scaffolding offers a highly promising path to lasting peace that drastically outperforms traditional diplomacy.
But, while the synthesis of those 50 studies provided incredible clarity, the researchers are very clear that their work is far from finished.
Oh, absolutely.
The literature review revealed massive analytical gaps that still need to be addressed.
What kind of blind spots are we still looking at in the data?
First, there's a glaring lack of gendered analysis regarding local mediation.
Oh, wow.
In many of these traditional societies, women act as the unseen, informal mediators within the family unit or the neighborhood.
That makes a lot of sense.
But their specific dynamics, the unique barriers they face, and their strategic opportunities are largely absent from the formal data.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because if the entire premise is that peace relies on the full community's trust, you absolutely have to understand the mechanisms of how everyone in that community experiences the conflict.
Ignoring gender means we are effectively missing half the picture of how a community organically rebuilds itself.
What else is missing?
The researchers point out a lack of comparative data across different ethnic and religious subgroups within these specific regions. But perhaps the most daunting challenge for future research is the methodological nightmare of measuring long-term impact.
Oh, I can imagine.
How do you quantify long-term reconciliation 5 or 10 years after an initial pilot project ends?
Right.
Because of the sheer number of highly localized, context-specific variables in any given village, creating a standardized scientific metric for something as fluid as peace remains incredibly difficult.
It's notoriously hard to put human trust into a spreadsheet.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? We've covered everything from the systemic failures of international diplomacy to the mechanical impacts of village-level skills training. And I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over today.
It's a big one.
We've seen the hard, empirical data showing that local, community-driven mediation, the difficult, messy, face-to-face work of sitting down, understanding someone else's deeply held ethical frameworks, and doing the slow work of fixing the foundation is the proven key to solving complex generational conflicts in places like Sulu, Asia, and Mindanao.
Yes.
The shiny pens and mahogany tables of the elite fail, but the muddy boots on the ground succeed. If that is true for armed regional conflicts, what does that say about how we handle our own everyday conflicts? Are we relying too much on modern society's versions of elite diplomacy? When we face severe disputes in our communities or workplaces, do we immediately run to HR departments, file lawsuits, or appeal to authority figures to come down and force a sterile ruling?
That's usually the first instance.
Are we just trying to paint the roof while our own foundations crumble? Maybe the rigorous research coming out of Sulu is a reminder that there are no shortcuts. We need to bravely do the messy, interpersonal, grassroots work in our own lives, too.
It is a powerful translation of the data. True, durable resolution always requires us to do the heavy lifting ourselves.
That's it for today's deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of discovery. Stay curious, keep building those strong foundations, and we will catch you next time.